Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are going through part 1, chapter 5, the Ascent of Sacrifice, part 1. And in our last episode, episode number 70, we saw how the works of knowledge, especially in the fields of arts, music, poetry, sculpture, all that, philosophy, all that, how they get uplifted when you develop the yogi consciousness, because with that higher vision, higher consciousness, it can infuse into these works its own immense creative potential, uplifting delight, and not only infuse, it can create whole new forms as part of the evolutionary unfolding of the world. So that is what we broadly covered in the last episode. Now we are starting with episode 71, paragraph number 11. And for those who are new, kindly check the description below. You will find the link to this particular chapter. Look at paragraph number 11, where we are starting. We are diving in line by line to immerse ourselves in Sri Aurobindo's words. This then is the true relation between divine and human knowledge. So these two domains of knowledge, one is the human domain of knowledge, there is a divine domain of knowledge. Human knowledge is that limited knowledge of the human consciousness, bound by the senses, looking outward through the senses, studying the sensory world, deriving the knowledge through our limited intellectual comprehension and its colors of emotions, habits, all that. It is through that our human consciousness works, and it is a very limited knowledge. Then there is a divine knowledge where we transcend these limitations and access higher faculties of knowledge, higher states of consciousness that are divine. And from there we have very different perspective and different knowledge. So this then is the true relation between divine and human knowledge. It is not a separation into disparate fields, sacred and profane. That is the heart of the difference, but the character of the consciousness behind the working. In ordinary approach to spiritual development, there is this tendency to separate things into sacred and profane. And in integral approach, this division doesn't exist. We bring in that divine consciousness into all that we are doing and transform it. It is the consciousness behind the working of, since this is in the field of knowledge, so the working of knowledge in whatever be the field, the consciousness behind it will be fundamentally different when we are able to arrive at it. This then is the true relation between divine and human knowledge. It is not separation into disparate fields, sacred and profane, that is the heart of the difference, but the character of the consciousness behind the working. All is human knowledge that proceeds from the ordinary mental consciousness, interested in the outside or upper layers of things, in process, in phenomena for their own sake, or for the sake of some surface utility, or mental or vital satisfaction of desire or of the intelligence. This is how our normal human consciousness, human knowledge proceeds. That proceeds from the ordinary mental consciousness. That is our rational intelligence at the best, interested in outside or upper layers of things. Outside or upper layers. what our senses can perceive is the outer layer, the material layer, material processes, energy processes, or economic movements, emotional movements, all that senses can observe. Processes in phenomena for their own sake. We are studying electricity to understand electricity. We are studying atoms to understand atoms. Whereas from a yogic perspective, we will be looking at the same thing from how a higher consciousness, divine consciousness, translates itself into becoming electricity, becoming atom, becoming a cell, becoming an organism. Normal consciousness, since it doesn't have the notion of the divine consciousness behind, it will study the surface to understand how the mechanism works. So interested in the outside or upper layers of things, in process, in phenomena for their own sake, or for sake of some surface utility. We study these heat, electricity, energy, all that movement so that we can utilize it. How to make our motor cars, our appliances, our surface level of utility, or mental or vital satisfaction of desire or of the intelligence. So these are the ways we utilize this human ordinary consciousness. But the same activity of knowledge can become part of the yoga. This is what we are looking at, this yoga of knowledge, how to make even these ordinary surface studies of things, how to make it part of the yoga. If it proceeds from the spiritual or spiritualizing consciousness, which seeks and finds in all that it surveys or penetrates the presence of the timeless eternal and the ways of manifestation of the eternal in time. So there are two things here. One is if it proceeds from the spiritual or spiritualizing consciousness. Of course, initially we don't have the spiritual consciousness. We are progressively spiritualizing our normal, ordinary mental consciousness, which seeks and finds in all that it surveys or penetrates the presence of the timeless eternal. So this, our search is to pierce through these outer layers to find the presence of the timeless eternal, that which is timeless, and the ways of manifestation of the eternal in time. So that which is beyond time translates itself into time and its rhythms and movements. How does that process work? How does it translate from the formless? How does it become pure vibration into energy, into particle? And how does the particles come together to form an atom, to form a cell? How does life emerge? How does the divine consciousness propelling it from behind the scene, pushing it to express through these combinations of surface phenomena its underlying consciousness? So that is what we will be looking at from a sadhana perspective. A sadhak can take up any field of work, but whatever be the field, behind the surfaces, we cut through it to see the divine consciousness that is operating. The same activity of knowledge can become part of the yoga if it proceeds from the spiritual or spiritualizing consciousness, which seeks and finds in all that it surveys or penetrates the presence of the timeless eternal and the ways of manifestation of the eternal in time. And that process becomes much more accelerated, more effective when our mental consciousness progressively transformed into spiritual consciousness. That's when the ability to see through the surfaces gets highly enhanced and reliable. It is evident that the need of a concentration indispensable for the transition out of the ignorance may make it necessary for the seeker to gather together his energies and focus them only on that which will help the transition, and to leave aside or subordinate for the time all that is not directly turned towards the one object. So, on one hand, we have to make the transition from ordinary mental consciousness to spiritual consciousness. On the other, we have to see behind the appearances, cut through to see the eternal behind it, find the process. So, since this is to be done, it is evident that not all activities may be helpful to make that transition. Therefore, we may have to make a choice. So it is evident that the need of a concentration indispensable for the transition out of the ignorance. A concentration where we discard a whole lot of things and focus all our attention upon a few that will enable us to make the transition. Make it necessary for the seeker to gather together his energies and focus them only on that which will help the transition, and leave aside or subordinate for the time all that is not directly turned towards the one object. So the one object is the eternal, timeless, behind the surface phenomena. That has to be discovered. And we have to make the transition into spiritual consciousness. He may find that this or that pursuit of human knowledge with which he was accustomed to deal by the surface power of the mind still brings him, by reason of his tendency or habit, out of the depths to the surface or down from the heights which he has climbed or is nearing to lower levels. So we will notice this tendency because our ordinary mental consciousness operates at a certain level. Even when we are able to make the transition into the inner ranges, to the deeper and deeper depths, or ascend to higher and higher ranges, we fall back by the downward gravitation, by the existing habits of the mentalized normal human consciousness. It will pull things down or pull out from inward journey to the surface layer. So that is something that we will naturally encounter in the process, and that's part of the process. We have to make transition, but in the process we will find, because of the established habits of the normal human consciousness, it will pull us down or pull us out into the surface. He may find that this or that pursuit of human knowledge with which he was accustomed to deal by the surface power of the mind. Surface power of the mind is the normal sensory intellectual knowledge and its operations. By the surface power of the mind still brings him, by reason of his tendency or habit, out of the depths to the surface or down from the heights which he has climbed or is nearing to lower levels. Climbing or nearing to lower levels. Here, lower levels is there are many ranges above our normal human consciousness. So the lower ranges of that can be accessed by ascending into it. These activities then may have to be intermitted or put aside until, secure in a higher consciousness, he is able to turn its powers on all the mental fields. So it is only for a temporary period we are putting aside all the fields of knowledge and choosing only the fields of knowledge activities that are enabling you to dive deeper inward or ascend upward. Once we are able to settle, make that transition into deeper inner consciousness or in a higher range of consciousness, then from there we can come back and look at all fields that we have put aside. So that is the possibility, that is the way to proceed in integral yoga. these activities then may have to be intermitted or put aside. So it has to be held back until, secure in a higher consciousness, he is able to turn its powers, the powers of higher consciousness, on all the mental fields. Then subjected to that light or taken up into it. So we bring the powers of higher consciousness into the mental fields that we normally engage with. With that, we can infuse it with that light or taken up into that higher consciousness. They are turned by the transformation of his consciousness into a province of the spiritual and divine. So, because of the transformation of one's consciousness, by having access to higher state, because of that access, these normal fields become a province of the spiritual and divine, because you can begin to see the way that timeless translates itself into manifestation through its rhythm and process. So these activities then may have to be intermitted or put aside until, secure in a higher consciousness, he is able to turn its powers on all the mental fields, then subjected to that light or taken up into it. They are turned by the transformation of his consciousness into a province of the spiritual and divine. So you may come back to study any field, whether it is scientific fields of study or psychology or astrology, astronomy, any field. When you access a higher consciousness, you are looking at these fields from a very different vantage point. They will reveal very, very different perspectives. And therefore, you can make all these fields into a divine province. All that cannot be transformed or refuses to be part of a divine consciousness, he will abandon without hesitation, but not from any preconceived or prejudgment of its unfitness or its incapacity to be an element of the new inner life. So there is also an abandonment without hesitation, but that abandonment is done from having access to higher consciousness, then looking at the fields and say, this particular field is refusing to change. It cannot be so transformed or refuses to be part of a divine consciousness. Anything is behaving that way, you discover that this cannot be part of any divine plan, any divine consciousness. That can be abandoned, but not abandoning from any moral construct, not any mythical construct, not any preconceived notions, but having established in the inner consciousness or higher consciousness, you come back and look at these things and say, wow, this is ready to undergo transformation. This particular activity is not ready to undergo transformation. It has to be rejected. And it cannot stand the light of the inner nature. For example, our normal habits itself, mental habit of studying things from normal mental consciousness, we may find this is not necessarily what is fascinating for you in particular. Someone else may find they can take that up and translate and transform. But you may find what you had found interest in a particular field before your inner transformation, that has done its work. It is no more interesting, or it refuses to undergo transformation. And you say, over, done with. I move on to other fields that are really open for transformation and ready to be taken up. That draws your attention naturally, spontaneously. What is meant for you as an individual? what is not meant for you doesn't mean that it may not be meant for other people. Somebody else may take things up that you may reject as invalid for you. So all that cannot be so transformed or refuses to be part of a divine consciousness, he will abandon without hesitation, but not from any preconceived prejudgment of its unfitness or its incapacity to be an element of the new inner life. There can be no fixed mental test or principle for these things. He will therefore follow no unalterable rule. So here again, we are not following any fixed mental rule. We rely on the newly developed spiritual consciousness. There can be no fixed mental test or principle for these things. He will therefore follow no unalterable rule, but accept or repel an activity of the mind according to his feeling, insight, or experience. Feeling, insight, or experience. Here, the feeling is not the surface, superficial, emotional response, but a deeper soul feeling, insight, or experience, until the greater power and light are there to turn their unerring scrutiny on all that is below and choose or reject their material out of what the human evolution has prepared for the divine labor. So initially we use our fine sensibility of feeling, insight, intuition, a deep intuition in the heart, we can say. And also we learn through experience. This is not working, this is what works. That's the initial, and that is used only till a greater power and light from above settles and makes things very clear. To turn their unerring scrutiny. So these higher consciousness, its light and power, has an unerring scrutiny that can clearly show this is okay and this is not okay on all that is below, and choose or reject their material out of what the human evolution has prepared for the divine labor. There is our human evolution unfolding, and this evolution has gathered vast body of knowledge, the mental knowledge, mental work, and out of all that, certain things are meant for further evolution. Those things will be picked up, the rest will be naturally discarded. What is relevant, especially for any given particular context, a particular age, which field of knowledge is required, and a particular instrument meant for that particular field of knowledge to be developed will be given that task, the rest will be discarded. There can be no fixed mental test or principle for these things. He will therefore follow no unalterable rule, but accept or repel an activity of the mind according to his feeling, insight, or experience, until the greater power and light are there to turn their unerring scrutiny on all that is below and choose or reject their material out of what the human evolution has prepared for the divine labor. How precisely or by what stages this progression and change will take place must depend on the form, need, and powers of the individual nature. So this progression from the surface consciousness to deeper inner consciousness or higher consciousness on one side, other is a selection and rejection of what field is appropriate. This will depend upon individual nature. Each sadhak, each practitioner has a unique construction, unique bundle of habits, unique possibilities, unique destiny. And depending upon the individual, this progression will have its stages. So how precisely or by what stages this progression and change will take place must depend on the form, need, and powers of the individual nature. Each individual has certain forms. We have not only physical form, we have an emotional, habitual form, we can say, and also mental formations that we, on one hand, inherit from society, on the other hand, we develop. There are certain forms to it, and there are certain needs to which we are responding, and corresponding powers that we have developed. So it must depend on form, need, and powers of the individual nature. In the spiritual domain, the essence is always one. So that is something we need to keep in mind. Essence is always one in the spiritual domain. But there is yet an infinite variety, and at any rate in integral yoga, the rigidity of a strict and precise mental rule is seldom applicable. So on one hand, essentially all individuals at a deeper spiritual level is one. There is a one spiritual essence common across all individual nature. Yet there is an infinite variety, just like in our physical nature, material body, we see unique thumbprint, specific to each individual, never repeated. The same way, our inner psychological layers, here we are referring to largely the works of knowledge, which is primarily the works of mind. And each mind is unique in its character. Infinite variety is there among people. So there is yet an infinite variety. At any rate, in the integral yoga, the rigidity of a strict and precise mental rule is seldom applicable. So we don't fix any mental rule in integral yoga, because the mind is a very, very limited instrument with limited knowledge, limited capacity. It has a temporary small utility. For even when they walk in the same direction, no two natures proceed on exactly the same lines, in the same series of steps, or with quite identical stages of their progress. So when two individuals are walking on the path, both may be drawn to yoga of knowledge work. Still, their unique nature will differentiate them, their approach to the way they will proceed, what will work for an individual, what will not work for another individual. So that has to be kept in mind. Even when they walk in the same direction, no two natures proceed on exactly the same lines. This also means don't copy others. You have your own unique nature. Don't look left and right. Get guidance from within, or higher consciousness pouring into you. Get the guidance directly from there. No two natures proceed exactly the same lines, in the same series of steps, or with quite identical stages of their progress. So the steps that you would follow will vary from others, as well as the stages that you need to go through as an individual will vary. We cannot copy paste it from other people, however similar they look in terms of what they are doing and what you're aspiring to do. You have your own unique nature that has to be respected. It has its own steps, it has its own stages. So in spiritual domain, the essence is always one, but there is yet an infinite variety. And at any rate, in the integral yoga, the rigidity of a strict and precise mental rule is seldom applicable. For even when they walk in the same direction, no two natures proceed on exactly the same lines, in the same series of steps, or with quite identical stages of their progress. It may yet be said that a logical succession of the states of progress would be very much in this order. It may yet be said that a logical succession. So on one hand, he is saying every individual is different. The steps that you would follow, the stages that you will discover will vary infinitely because your nature is different. And yet, there is some logical succession of the states of progress would be very much in this order. And he's now giving the order. First, there is a large turning in which all the natural mental activities proper to the individual nature are taken up or referred to a higher standpoint and dedicated by the soul in us, the psychic being, the priest of the sacrifice, to the divine service. That is the first stage, where there is a large turning of our whole being, in which all natural mental activities, I just said whole being, perhaps we should correct, not necessarily whole being. Usually when we start our journey, it is a part of the being that turns, not the whole being. It takes a long journey to make the whole being to arrive at that self-consecration. Here we are looking at all the mental activities. There is a large turning in which all the natural mental activities proper to the individual nature. It is not just natural mental activities. Those that are proper to the individual nature are taken up or referred to a higher standpoint and dedicated by the soul in us, the psychic being, the priest of the sacrifice, to the divine service. So how do we take up all the activities and put them at the service of the divine? And in that, the priest of the sacrifice is the psychic being, the emerging soul within, who can discern what is the activity, the demands of the descending higher consciousness, the pathways it is showing. So we are offering our normal activities into this inner fire that will check it. Is this in alignment? Is this going? And everything is offered. So first there is a large turning in which all natural mental activities proper to the individual nature are taken up or referred to a higher standpoint and dedicated by the soul in us. So the soul in us dedicates every activity to that higher standpoint. The soul in us, the psychic being, the priest of the sacrifice, to the divine service. Next, there is an attempt of an ascent of the being and a bringing down of the light and power proper to some new height of consciousness gained by its upward effort into the whole action of the knowledge. So first is taking up every field of activity and putting it at the service of this higher reference. Then comes the attempt at an ascent of the being to a higher level and bringing down of the light and power of that proper to some new height of consciousness. This light and power proper to the new height that we are able to access, gained by its upward effort into the whole action of the knowledge. So there is an upward effort. We may not even be able to know what this upward effort initially is, but there is an effort that is required in terms of learning to open upward. And sometimes it is the descending movement that is experienced. Sometimes you notice the center of consciousness rising above the head into a higher ridge. So both are part of that transitional experience. Sometimes you experience this gentle, soft pressure from above that is softly coming down. Other moments, you may find your sense of center of being shifting upward, rising upward into a space above. even going beyond the roof into the sky. All that possibilities are there. First is to have that notion that such things do happen, and one need to look for that. That is the effort required in ascension. Otherwise, we will be stumbling our way through, caught up in the sensory world. We need to know there is a range above which we need to access. Then there is a necessary effort that comes from there, understanding. There is an attempt at an ascent of the being and a bringing down. Not only ascent, then we bring it down of the light and power proper to some new height of consciousness gained by this upward effort into the whole action of knowledge. So there is an action of knowledge in the world. There is an inner action, and then it's pouring out into the world. Into that, we are bringing in this, what we newly access from above. It has been brought into it. Here, there may be a strong concentration on the inward central change of consciousness and an abandonment of a large part of the outward going mental life, or else its relegation to a small and subordinate place. So at this stage is where we reduce our outward flowing mental life. Our normal life is constantly concerned with outer life, particularly when the mind is so totally absorbed with the world events and the news reportings, and you get absorbed in that, you get lost in that. Out of that, what is truly helping you to make the transition inward? So there may be a strong concentration on the inward central change of consciousness. That's the first requirement, to discover the psychic being that would demand you to make some choice. This constant outwardization through the news media or whatever be the outer studies that you would do, out of that, what is truly helping you to make the transition inward? Is there anything? If not, discard, reduce, minimize. An abandonment of a large part of the outward going mental life, or else its relegation to a small and subordinate place. Give it limited time so that it doesn't consume you entirely. So you have time freed up, effort freed up, energy freed up, with which you can make an inward journey to make the transition, to come in touch. It has to be the priority to come in touch with that consciousness. So there is a transition, an inward central change of the consciousness. You're moving from the surface personality, surface being, to inner being, to the inmost, moving from the ego personality to the soul's directives. So that transition is central because that is what will enable you to discern the will, the divine consciousness and force descending from above. Otherwise, we will not be able to discern. Therefore, this first transition has to be made. And in order to make that transition, we have to discard things that are not helping, things that are activities that are draining our energy, absorbing our energy outwardly. So an abandonment of a large part of the outward going mental life, or else its relegation to a small and subordinate place. Outward going mental life. We are mental beings, and a great deal of our time and energy are spent in mental life. We have to distinguish between mental life, vital life, physical life. In a physical life, there is a physical needs and the physical activities, whether it is eating, playing, crafting things, all that are physical life. We are involved materially, physically. Then there is an emotional life where we are engaging with people emotionally, intimately, personally. And there is a contact and exchange and enjoyment of all that, energy exchange and financial exchanges when it comes to energy dimension. So all that is more vital exchange with world that is around. Then there is a mental life, where we are consuming the social media, world media, or studying books, engaging with people in intellectual discussions and all kinds of things. Mental work. And these days, most people are like, mental labor is the main predominant labor. Most work that you do are mental operations and mental activities. So out of that, how much is necessary for the upkeep of life, and what is helping for the inner journey, making that inner transition, so you reduce. So here, like this, listening to this podcast, for example, it's a mental activity, it's a mental life, but mental life directed towards understanding the ways and the workings of the divine consciousness, so that your mind understands and you can make the choice. So this type of activity helps you, whereas some other type of activity may not help you get the right discernment and the right choice. So you choose what is nourishing, what is taking you inward, what is bringing the central shift. So here, there may be a strong concentration on the inward central change of consciousness and an abandonment of a large part of the outward going mental life, or else it's a relegation to a small and subordinate place. At different stages, it or parts of it may be taken up again from time to time. So we are not abandoning them forever. When you reach a different stage of your progression, from there, you may take it up time to time to see whether you can actually transform it or see the workings of the divine behind things. So you can pick it up at different stages. It or parts of it may be taken up again from time to time to see how far the new inner psychic and spiritual consciousness can be brought into its movements. So this is the reason why you go back and pick up, to see to what extent your psychic discernment and spiritual consciousness can be brought into it. Is it receptive? Is it able to open to the psychic influence, the spiritual consciousness? Even when you are getting back to a particular study, particular mental activity, whether it is capable as a vessel, can you stay awake in your inner poise and engage in the activity? Can you stay open to the descending force and still engage in the activity? For example, right now I am recording this. I'm recording this at the same time. Can I stay focused inward, be in that deeper space and discernment? At the same time, can I also open upward, poise upward, or receive its descending movement? If that is, then this activity I can integrate. Similarly, you can look at any mental activity that you will be doing. Can you do it while you are poised there and bring its radiance into the activity? So at different stages, it or parts of it may be taken up again from time to time to see how far the new inner psychic and spiritual consciousness can be brought into its movements. But the compulsion of the temperament of or the nature, which in the human beings necessitates one kind of activity or another and makes it seem almost an indispensable portion of the existence, will diminish, and eventually no attachment will be left, no lower compulsion or driving force felt anywhere. So our normal operations of our mental, vital, and physical being is through habitual compulsions. So we will experience these compulsions initially. The compulsion to check the news, for example, it's a compulsion. And as we proceed, and as you increasingly psychicize, that means in bringing influence of the psychic being into that particular activity, or bringing spiritual consciousness into it from your calm vastness. So it will not be a compulsive action, it will lose its compulsiveness. It will become increasingly a conscious act where you can actually look at the news, world events, trace them, track them, study them without being compulsive about it. You are more of master in that space. You are coming from a psychic discernment and infused with a higher spiritual consciousness, so that that particular field which was otherwise compulsive undergoes transformation, and you can stop it anytime you want, choose whatever you want, and do it only when you see the need to do it. Otherwise you don't. You can put that aside as long as you don't need it. So all that become possible. That compulsion of the temperament or the nature, which in human beings necessitates one kind of activity or another. Usually we are driven by this compulsion, driving us to do one thing or another, and makes it seem almost an indispensable portion of our existence. So that compulsion makes it feel like this is indispensable. I cannot live without reading the news, without listening to the news, world news. It is a compulsion. It becomes an absolute necessity, as if you are addicted to it. All that is not necessary. It will go away, it will fall, and it will become something. This compulsion will diminish, and eventually no attachment will be left. You will not have any attachment to it. You can choose, you can drop anytime, as and when it is required. No lower compulsion or driving force felt anywhere. So let's read this line once again, because this is how we practice. First, putting aside as an activity that is very compulsive, I'm not able to take it up. So you reject because it's not open yet. Then you are truly making an inward shift, coming in touch with the psychic presence or opening to higher force. And as this, you feel, now I can try it. So you come back again, get into this activity and see if it works. I'm able to retain my inner poise, higher connection. Then you can transform that activity because it is open, it is receptive. This part of your being, this particular activity, which otherwise was a compulsion. At different stages, it or parts of it may be taken up again from time to time to see how far the new inner psychic and spiritual consciousness can be brought into its movements. But that compulsion of the temperament or the nature, which in the human beings, in human beings necessitates one kind of activity or another and makes it seem almost an indispensable portion of the existence, will diminish, and eventually no attachment will be left, no lower compulsion or driving force felt anywhere. Only the divine will matter. The divine alone will be the one need of the whole being. So the whole being would feel that the real need of your being is nothing but the divine, and divine will alone matters. No other will drive you, only the divine will. So only the divine will matter. The divine alone will be the one need of the whole being. If there is any compulsion to activity, if there is any compulsion to activity, it will be not that of implanted desire or of force of nature, but the luminous driving of some greater consciousness force, which is becoming more and more the sole motive power of the whole existence. Our normal compulsive action is driven by desire or force of nature, which is compulsion, which is like something that is implanted in us and nature drives us. And this gets replaced by a luminous drive of some greater consciousness force, Chit Shakti, that comes from above. So there is a transition that we are making from the drive. The motive engine is no more the desire implanted by nature. nor the mechanical drive of nature. Instead, there is a luminous conscious will of the Chit Shakti, the divine Shakti pouring her dynamic force, and it is that which will move your action. It will move your thought, mind seeking, heart seeking, all that will be shifted. The luminous driving of some greater consciousness force, which is becoming more and more the sole motive power of the whole existence. That will be the motive power. Motivation behind every engine. Motive engine. You cannot say engine. Engine is a machine. Here it is not a machine. It is a conscious embrace of the divine Shakti. And you can feel that you being held in a peaceful, profound, luminous presence. Only the divine will matter. The divine alone will be the one need of the whole being. If there is any compulsion to activity, it will be not that of implanted desire or of force of nature, but the luminous driving of some greater consciousness force, which is becoming more and more the sole motive power of the whole existence. On the other hand, it is possible at any period of the inner spiritual progress that one may experience an extension rather than a restriction of the activities. There may be an opening of new capacities of mental creation, new provinces of knowledge by the miraculous touch of the Yoga Shakti. So this is something that many people experience. When you turn inward and access increasingly that guidance from the psychic being and its radiance, or open upward and the Shakti pours down, new capacities emerge. For example, the poetic capacity may suddenly burst forth. A writing capacity may show up. A capacity for a profound inner visions, imaginations that are not your normal routine approaches. But inspired visions, inspired writings, an intense self-expression which did not exist before. And you might surprise, how did this come? You did not even get any training. It just showed up. Something shows up. A gift shows up. And spontaneously you find yourself learning, or not even learning, finding yourself expressing the capacity to talk in ways that are beyond your normal understanding. You find your own speech suddenly taken up by a greater force and revealing things of which you are a learner. You're observing what is finding expression through you. And you see that you can surrender your normal mental operations and be passive, receptacle to the action of the divine Shakti. And she will think through you, speak through you, does things, and gives your faculty of imagination can get surrendered. And you find your capacities getting uplifted into a new possibility. So, on the other hand, it is possible at any period of the inner spiritual progress that one may experience an extension rather than a restriction of the activities. So when this opening happens, instead of you limiting yourself to any particular field which you are used to, suddenly you find you're getting fascinated by so many other fields because you see the divine action behind things. You want to know, how does this field works? How does, for example, how does the market works? How does the nations invest in other nations or exchange money? How the vital between the nations flow through? How the knowledge is flowing from one nation to other? Suddenly you find that every field, whether it is geopolitics or stock exchange, everything you may find fascinating, provided it is opened up by a higher consciousness. Now you're seeing, wow, this is how the world is working. So the Chit Shakti, the divine Shakti, will open up the perception, the doors of perception, and extend the field of knowledge beyond what you were otherwise used to. So an extension rather than a restriction of the activities. There may be an opening of new capacities of mental creation and new provinces of knowledge by the miraculous touch of the yoga Shakti. And you begin to see fields that are opening up, becoming fascinating. Every little thing, you look at a flower, see its color, and you begin to see beyond the surface appearances. On one hand, also you get fascinated. How does the chemistry produce this color? How does physics create this color? And what is the corresponding state of consciousness finding expression through this color? What is the living presence behind the flower? What is the state of consciousness? And how does it, through its rhythm and process, creates this beautiful form? You may study fractal geometry to study pure math, to understand how a form unfolds. What is the rhythm and process? You look at mathematics from the point of view of spiritual unfolding from pure consciousness, how quality of a consciousness become the quantity and rhythm and expressive movement of force and color. All that become very, very fascinating because your inner consciousness is waking up. Everything is an expression of the divine presence, revealing itself through world manifestation. Aesthetic feeling, the power of artistic creation in one field or many fields together, talent or genius of literary expression, a faculty of metaphysical thinking, any power of eye or ear or hand or mind power may awaken where none was apparent before. So yoga can bring in many hidden talents, which was not at all visible in your normal mundane life. And you take up yoga, you dive inward, you open upward, and Yoga Shakti begins her operations. Suddenly, you discover an aesthetic feeling may open up. The power of artistic creation may open up in one field or many fields together. Talent or genius of literary expression may show up. A faculty of metaphysical thinking may show up. You may not have any interest in philosophy. Suddenly, not only interest, you can originally think metaphysically. And power of eye, like your seeing normally is limited to surface of things. Suddenly your eyes, the range of your seeing opens up. The superficial seeing is extended to see subtler things, nuances, finer and finer visions beyond the material layers. Or the power of eye or ear or hand or mind power. So every sense can extend their range. All senses are extensions of the mind, and therefore mind power also extends way beyond. May awaken where none was apparent before. So these things can happen. So the work of knowledge, and when we open in those fields, especially when we learn to open the divine Shakti and works, she builds the instruments, she extends their range, extend their scope, and extend their possibilities, what you can do. The divine within may throw these latent riches out from the depths in which they were hidden, or a force from above may pour down its energies to equip the instrumental nature for the activity or the creation of which it is meant to be a channel or a builder. So what was latent gets brought out. And remember, the divine consciousness, the divine Shakti is shaping you as an instrument for a designated work. So she is building the instruments, revealing the capacities, revealing the possibilities. What was latent gets brought out. Whatever be the talent, and things that are unimaginable. So don't limit yourself thinking that I can do only this. When you hand yourself into the hands of the divine Shakti, she will shape, she will build you, she will give you the capacities that was not there before. That's how your evolution is accelerated you are prepared as an instrument for a designated work. Even the work is not something that you choose, but it is given by the divine wisdom. So the divine within may throw these latent riches out from the depths in which they were hidden, or a force from above may pour down its energies to equip the instrumental nature for the activity or the creation of which it is meant to be a channel or a builder. You become a channel or a builder of activities that the divine Shakti chooses you to do. But whatever may be the method or the course of development chosen by the hidden master of the yoga, the common culmination of this stage is the growing consciousness of him alone as the mover, decider, shaper of all the movements of the mind and all the activities of knowledge. So whether your range of interest, fields interest expand and activity capacity for activities increase, or new talents emerge, new capacities emerge, one thing will be common to all, that will be the center of it. It is the knowledge of the divine, and it's that divine's impulsion, divine's movements, divine's revelations, surrendering to that and knowing that that is the connecting thread that will permeate everything that you do. Nothing is outside the scope of this. And this central movement will redefine everything, reshape everything, reveal in them that presence progressively unveiling itself. Whatever may be the method or the course of development chosen by the hidden master of the yoga, the common culmination of this stage is the growing consciousness of him alone as the mover, decider, shaper of all the movements of the mind and all the activities of knowledge. So you get infused with that growing presence of the divine in the activities of the knowledge. That will be the culmination that naturally happens when you follow the works of knowledge, and when that is illumined with the discovery of the psychic being and the descending force from above, you discover this potential. Initially, it may appear, or it can happen that you may reduce, shrink the activities to only that which is willing to undergo transformation, capable of undergoing transformation, so that you can move inward and find the inner transition, or opening upward and receive the force. And then that force will expand and enlarge your scope even way beyond your normal capacities. And in all that, the central presence will grow. That will be the signature of your actual transformation happening. So with that, we have come to the end of this episode. Please do share your experiences, your observations. Thank you, and see you next week.